5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's been live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Welcome to an extraordinary session of Lichtman Live. There is so much going on in America and the world that one could scarcely comprehend it. It seems like in just a few months, years and years of change, much of it very dangerous, has occurred. You know, time somehow seems to be compressed.
Really?
But if anyone can grasp this, I know it's our very smart and knowledgeable audience.
Why do you think that is? Just because technology has made the world move faster? The internet has made the world move faster?
That's part of it. But
what are you sipping on today? I'm sipping on some Spindrift.
Spindrift.
Well, we're both
Spindrift boys.
We're the Spindrift boys.
It's also Donald Trump. Donald Trump has vastly accelerated the pace of change, far outstripping any president, except maybe FDR.
Right.
But FDR went through Congress. FDR passed 15 major bills in 100 days. Trump has just about finished his 100 days. 15 major bills. How many major bills have Trump gotten through Congress?
Major bills at a general?
Major bills.
Major bill.
Yes. Zero.
Right.
Now, FDR also acted through executive order, but for the most part, he went through Congress. And like Trump, he had a Congress of his own party. Now, before we get to what's going on in the U.S., there are some very important international developments, which is of great significance to all of us. First of all, just a few days ago, we had the elections in Australia.
Nathan Zadro says, good morning from Sydney. So we've got people in Australia watching.
Great. Well, if I make any mistakes, I'm no expert in Australian politics.
You're not?
No. But I know a bit about it. I know a bit about almost everything, except the opera.
I'm about to say,
don't ask me about the opera.
Don't ask about the opera.
Yes, but when you asked me to name my favorite opera, I did come up with it.
There you go.
So I'm not totally ignorant of the opera.
There you go.
Any rate, so following on the heels of the Canadian election, we had the Australian election, which turned out to be very similar. We had a center-left ruling party led by Anthony Albanese, challenged by a center-right, Trump-oriented opposition party led by Peter Dutton. And just a few months ago, back in 2024, in the summer, early fall, it looked like, just as in Canada, the center-left ruling party was going to lose. Then what happened, Sam? Donald Trump.
How come everybody else gets the Trump warning and they run away from their conservative parties, but we're stuck with Trump?
I know. It's
not
just
fair.
It really isn't fair because, we've seen the opposite in Canada and Australia, which is, in many ways similar democracies to the United States. Hell, Canada is even going to become our 51st state, right?
No, I think Carney said, when was that, yesterday or today, that Canada will never be for sale.
Yes.
Not for sale. Never be
never
for sale.
Be for sale.
To be
but
precise.
Trump had the effrontery to, throw that right in his face. But that's another story. I want to focus on the Australian elections.
And just to clarify, even though the Liberal Party, Dutton's party, are the Liberals, they're actually the center-right party.
Right. They're called the Liberals. The other, I believe, is called the Labour Party.
Yes.
But often in foreign countries, liberal parties are center-right. Well, the advent of Trump and the association of Peter Dutton with Trump and the MAGA movement, like in Canada, totally reversed electoral fortunes. The center-left party of Albanese, the Labour Party, not just won the election, they won it smashingly, unlike in Canada, where the ruling center-left party, I think, came 3 seats short of a majority. In Australia, the center-left Labour Party won a smashing majority of seats in the parliament. So they're not dependent on any other parties to form their government. And it's a government with an enormous, incredible mandate. And meanwhile, not only did the center-right party falter in the election. But you know what happened to Peter Dutton? Just like the guy in Canada.
He's out.
He lost his own seat.
Yeah.
So he's out, much less his party being on the outs. A couple of very interesting things about Australian elections.
Okay.
Number one, did you know this, Sam? They have compulsory voting.
I did know that.
Yeah. I'm not sure how rigorously it's enforced, but
You
presumably...
get fined.
You get fined.
Yeah, you get fined.
You get fined if you don't. You don't get thrown in prison.
Yes, you get fined.
But you do get fined, and I think it's a great idea. I think we should have compulsory voting here in the United States. No chance, of course, but I think it would be quite a good idea. They also have preferential voting. Do you know about that?
No.
That's like the transferable vote. Not only does your first vote count, but other choices count if no one wins an outright majority for a seat in the first go-round. So it really matters, not only if your party is the first choice, but if your party is the second and third choice of voters, because those votes are very likely to be counted. So, real positive development in Australia as in Canada for democracy, for international cooperation, for tolerance, for human rights, for civil rights. Unfortunately, things that are being so horribly eroded here. Now, there is some...
Wait, before we get to that,
Yeah.
do you know the Australian national anthem?
I don't.
Should we play it?
Yes.
Okay.
Pretty good.
That's it. It's called Advance Australia Fair.
Wow.
I thought we should play it for the folks at home.
Awesome. I spent a couple of weeks in Tahiti.
That's not Australia.
Well, let me finish.
Okay, well.
Guess who most of the people who were, this was at Club Med, who were there were from?
Well, at Club Med?
At Club Med in Tahiti was mostly Australian.
Shocking.
Overwhelmingly Australian. So at least for a time, I got to have a number of good Australian friends.
Okay, repeat after me. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Oi, oi, oi.
No, thank you. All right. I want to mention one negative electoral development in Eastern Europe, which doesn't have the same kind of long-standing democratic traditions that Australia or Canada or the U.S. has. We're talking about Romania, place I did visit to lecture many years ago, and I loved Romania. Love the people, love the history.
Do they have a Club Med in Romania?
I did not go to Club Med. I've been to, I think, 2 Club Meds in my life.
Right.
And one of them was in Tahiti. I think that was after my second marriage fell apart, but we don't want to go into that.
Let's not get into that.
We're not going to get into that. In Romania, they have runoff elections. If nobody gets a majority for the presidency in the first round, they go to a runoff. And in the first round, the far-right Trumpian candidate overwhelmingly outdistanced the field with 40% of the vote to, I think, 20-some odd for the next closest candidate. So he's the leading candidate going into the runoff. It's not decided yet. It's not a guarantee that he's going to win, but certainly he is the favorite. We also had an election probably nobody knows about in Singapore.
Oh.
An extraordinary, wealthy, but very tightly controlled place. It's basically a city, but it's got 6 million people. And the ruling party there, when contrary to the anti-incumbent sentiment we had seen prior to Trump, they've been ruling for a long time, and they got 90% of the vote. Pretty good.
I heard Singapore has the best food in the world. Is that true?
I have heard that. I have not been there. The best food I've ever had, Taiwan or India or Italy.
That's 3. You can't pick 3.
I can't decide among them.
It's because, right, they have the Chinese in Singapore. They have the Chinese culture. They have the Indian culture.
Have everything in Singapore.
And the Southeast Asian culture. They got the best food.
Best of all worlds, yes. I'd like to try the Singaporean cuisine, but I'm not real keen on a 24-hour flight. It was tough enough. Last time I did that, I went to India and South Korea. All of these were lecture trips.
Right, not Club Med trips, just to be clear.
Club. I've been to 2 Club Meds. One with your mom.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Now, something truly ominous, truly serious just happened today. And that is India launched a bombing attack on its neighbor, Pakistan. And this was supposedly in retaliation for a Pakistan-supported attack on Indian residents in the disputed areas of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, a little bit of history, Sam.
Okay.
Who used to control India?
The British Empire.
Yes, for 200 years. And then finally, in the wave of anti-colonialism after World War II, and by the way, the U.S. finally relinquished control over, do you know what other Asian country?
The U.S.?
The U.S. had one Asian country since the Spanish-American War.
Oh, the Philippines?
The Philippines. And we had fought a bloody war around the turn of the century to stifle the nationalist independence movement in the Philippines. It was not pretty. So India, it was called the Raj. It was under control of the British. And basically it included what are now 3 separate nations. You know what they are?
Pakistan,
yes,
India, Bangladesh.
You got it. None of that existed. So what they did was
So that was all one country.
It was all, well, it wasn't even a country. It was a colony.
Colony, right.
It's called the Raj, as I said. And, you know, if you know anything about India, yes, it's a unified country, but it is a country of enormous diversity. Lots of separate languages, separate living spaces. So, India at the time was in the throes of a horrible conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims.
When was this?
1947.
Okay.
And so, just like they partitioned other parts of the world, the British partitioned the Raj, partitioned it between India and Pakistan. And it was horrific. 15 million people at least were displaced, had to go one way or the other across the border. There were anywhere between hundreds of thousands and maybe 1 million deaths in the violence that followed the partition. And that began 70 years of bitter conflict between India and Pakistan that a number of times resulted in open warfare, including, people are not aware of this, there was a major war between India and Pakistan in 1971. And that war, which Pakistan then surrendered, resulted in another partition. That was the partition of East and West Pakistan, with East Pakistan becoming the nation of Bangladesh, which, by the way, is now the 8th most populous country in the world, with about 171 million persons. I believe Pakistan is the 5th, with something like 270 some odd million people. And of course, India is the 1st, with about 1.4 million. So you put the 3 countries together, packed into that region, and you have about 2 billion people.
That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people. And the conflict between India and Pakistan is particularly perilous because, as you know, what do they both possess?
Nukes.
Nuclear weapons. And the conflict is now boiling over. Presumably, India claims Pakistan supported terrorists, killed a number of Indians in the disputed territory, which has been disputed forever since the partition. And in return, India launched, I believe today, extensive bombing attacks on Pakistani targets, claiming, of course, as they always do, we only targeted terrorists. You know, we never targeted innocent civilians.
So let me get this straight.
Do we get a $550? No.
No. Hold on. So let me get this straight. In the 40s, the British Empire partitioned India, right? But
Correct. Then the Raj.
Then the Raj. into three separate...
No, two.
Two.
India and Pakistan.
And then when did Bangladesh...
1971, as a result of the war, which India and its supporters in East Pakistan won, Pakistan itself was then partitioned. So,
but Bangladesh is now its own country.
Yes, I'm going to explain that.
Okay.
So West Pakistan remains Pakistan.
Right.
And East Pakistan on the other side becomes Bangladesh.
And when does British independence or independence from the British come into play?
1947, the partition. That starts the conflict because you couldn't perfectly partition Hindu, India, and Muslim.
So
Pakistan.
All three of these regions were fighting for independence on their own, or sort of together?
Well, it wasn't so much a fight. Remember who led the British independence movement and what his philosophy was?
Gandhi.
Gandhi, right.
Nonviolence.
And eventually,
but he was
the
killed.
Colonial powers pretty much had to relinquish the colonies.
And when was that?
Gandhi was in the earlier 20th century. And, of course, he was assassinated.
Right.
But the partition occurred in this wave of decolonization.
But Gandhi is after the partition?
Before.
Oh.
He was assassinated before the partition.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
As far as I remember.
Let me check it out.
I'm pretty sure that's right. So you get the partition. There's no such thing as Bangladesh yet. There was only India and Pakistan.
He was killed in 1948.
All right at the time
The partition.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad you checked that.
Yeah.
So, at the time, there was only India and Pakistan, with a disputed border between them that led to all kinds of skirmishes, battles, small wars, and a huge war in 1971 that resulted in tens of thousands of casualties. India and their allies in East Pakistan, which wanted independence, won the war. And in 1971, as a result of the war, Pakistan was partitioned, and East Pakistan became the separate nation of Bangladesh. So Bangladesh has only been a separate nation since the early 1970s. But I says it's a huge nation. It's the fifth most populous nation in the world. 90% Muslim. There was not a conflict necessarily centered on being a Muslim. And sadly, it's a struggling, poor country.
Which one?
Bangladesh. But, India and Pakistan have their own enormous problems with poverty as well. So to get back to today, as I said, a big escalation in the war between India, conflict that's been going on for almost 70 years between India and Pakistan, or more than 70 years, burst out with first the killings, supposedly, of Pakistani-backed terrorists in the disputed territories, and then the bombing attack by India on Pakistan itself, claiming, of course, as they always do, we only targeted terrorists. I can't verify that one or another, but that's almost never true. That kind of precision bombing just is generally a fantasy. And, of course, what do you think Pakistan said?
You killed civilians? I don't know.
No, they said we have a right to retaliate.
Oh.
We're not just going to take this sitting down.
Right.
And so who knows, if this could erupt into another full-scale war like in 1971, this time with both nations armed with nuclear weapons. And, of course, that master of international relations, Donald Trump, had a very informed and very forceful response. You know what he said?
I know nothing about it.
It's a shame.
Oh.
They've been fighting for a long time. I just hope it ends very quickly. And by God, if this becomes a national security issue for the United States, which it could, these regional wars could spread, and certainly when you're talking about 2 million people crammed into this area, it could have implications worldwide. And who's in charge of our defense and national security?
Hegseth.
Hegseth. Good luck with that. This is very, very scary. Now, on a lighter note, Donald Trump has said, and people kind of miss this, I run the nation.
Are you moving on to topics?
I'm moving on topics.
I got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
China is also in the region.
Not exactly. They're pretty far away. This is Central Asia, China, of course, but they're not far. No, they're there. They're virtually on the border.
That's what I'm saying. They're on the border of India.
They're very close.
Do you see this turning into this massive global conflict with India, Pakistan, China? I mean, that
absolutely
could change
possible.
The whole world, right?
Yeah, these localized conflicts do have ways of spreading. Remember, the first blow that led to World War II was very limited. It was Hitler, after being appeased by Prime Minister Chamberlain, taking over the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, and that eventually blossomed into World War II in Europe.
I think China actually has some territory in the Kashmir region. I know China and
in Kashmir? I don't think so. I know they have border disputes, but I don't think it's in the Kashmir region. But, I'm no expert on this.
Okay, maybe
so
not.
I'm sure someone from that area in our audience knows better. But yes, China could get involved, and if China gets involved, all bets are off.
So you're pretty concerned about this.
I'm very concerned about this for a number of reasons. One, because these conflicts have been going on now, as I said, forever. Two, it's escalating in a very dangerous way. Three, nuclear weapons. They haven't been used, but they have them. Four, you're dealing with an area of if you count Bangladesh, which hasn't been directly involved yet, but if you just count India and Pakistan, it's about 1.7 billion people. China could get involved, and if China gets involved, then, it could become escalated into a world-scale conflict. I'm very worried about this, and I'm also worried that we don't have a national security and defense establishment that can deal with this kind of conflict, and certainly not a president who understands anything about what's going on here. And who's the national security advisor now?
Little Marco.
Yeah, and what is he also? Secretary of State, head of the National Archives, head of USAID. He's Lord High everything else. He's no way he can just focus on his responsibilities, both as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, and then the guy in charge of our entire military, shouldn't even be leading a platoon of soldiers, much less the Pentagon. It's very, very frightening. Yes, this has me greatly worried. Do you have another question?
No, I have I'm going to school the professor. China controls roughly 37,000 square kilometers of Kashmir. Primarily in the Aksai Chin region. This territory is a disputed area, with India also claiming.
Yeah, I knew they had a border dispute. I wasn't aware it was in Kashmir. You're right. You got me. Didn't I say I'm open to corrections?
Yes,
I'm not an expert on this.
Okay, what was the next thing you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, Donald Trump has said, right, I not only run the country, I run the world. And in a recent picture of himself, that was, he said, I had nothing to do with it. Of course, it was on Truth Social, which he controls, on his Twitter account, which he controls. Look at this picture.
Oh, right. I'm not ready. Hold on.
There it is.
No, they can't see it yet. Hold on. There it is.
There it is. What is he dressed up as?
The Pope.
The Pope. What better to control the world when you are both the president and the Pope?
Right.
And, he tried to disavow this, saying, it was, had nothing to do with it. Of course, it was right on his own media. Then he says it was only a joke. Does this look funny to you, Sam?
You know what? Okay, you're going to think this is crazy, but I'm actually on Donald Trump's side.
Oh, no.
I think out. I think this is just a funny troll. It's nothing. It's not that big of a deal. I don't think it's that offensive.
Compared to other things Trump has done.
Yeah, but it's just a social media
Here's a
post.
couple of things. One, they were still in mourning for Pope Francis, who's clashed with Trump quite a number of times. Two, they're about to have the conclave. They haven't quite had it yet, I think, in a couple of days to elect the new Pope. This is not the time to joke, even though I don't think this is the slightest bit funny. He also, of course, said all the Catholics love it. Is that true?
I doubt it.
They hate it, including U.S. bishops who said, this is not something that we should be doing while we're mourning Pope Francis and about to do the conclave, this really is an insult to Catholics. Remember, this is a guy who almost never sees the inside of a church, could not name one Bible verse when he was asked, held the Bible upside down in his photo op,
Everybody in the chat is agreeing with you and saying I'm wrong. So
all right. I'm wrong sometimes too.
Yeah, you were just wrong about Kashmir.
Exactly.
I'm wrong about this.
What do they say? To err is human, to forgive is divine.
Look, you have to be big enough to admit you're wrong.
I'm always happy to admit I'm wrong.
All right, so a lot of people in the chat are saying they're Catholic and they find it offensive. So
yeah, I'm not Catholic, and I find it offensive.
Yeah. I'm not Catholic.
I have a lot of Catholic friends, though.
Name 5.
Never mind.
Yes,
I could name 5, but it's okay.
Okay.
I just saw 2 of them the other day.
Okay, fair.
Michael and Chris Naylor, 2 old friends of mine who are Catholics.
Okay.
All right. Next. We already posted on this, but it's worth reiterating. Donald Trump was asked if he has to follow the Constitution. What did he say, Sam?
He says, I don't know. And I've got lawyers to figure that out.
What does the oath of office say?
You got to uphold the Constitution.
Yes, which he's taken twice. He's been president for 5 years. And the most fundamental duty, it's the only one specified in the oath of office. You've got to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. You don't need lawyers to tell you that. Then he was asked about due process, and what did he say? He didn't know about that either. Well, maybe it's, in the Constitution. I don't know. But, it would be too many trials if we had to adhere to due process. Much better if I just say you're guilty and send you off to some hellhole abroad. We posted on that, but it's worth reiterating.
Man, everybody in the chat is shitting on me. They're all saying it's offensive, it's sickening, I guess you were wrong. I guess I'm way off base on this one.
Yeah, you better brush up on your Catholicism. That's all I can say.
I guess so.
Next point.
Definitely understand why it's offensive.
Yeah. And Trump doesn't joke. He's not funny. He's not humorous.
He trolls around. He trolls a bit.
But he's not funny. Tell me one funny thing Trump has ever said or done.
He called Marco Rubio Little Marco. That's kind of funny.
I just thought that was offensive. I didn't think it was very funny or clever. Okay. But now he's Big Marco.
Don't get me wrong.
Big Marco.
Don't get me wrong. He's not clever. He's definitely not clever. But is he funny? Sometimes. And like I said, most of the time I'm laughing at him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's funny the way an infection is funny, I guess.
It's funny the way what's in it funny?
An infection is funny.
Oh, stop. Yeah, kind of, I guess.
Yeah, I just don't buy that. Another positive development, we just don't want to be attacking. A judge in Texas just struck down Trump's effort to deprive, I think it was about 300,000 immigrants from Latin America and the Caribbean who are here legally under protective status. And Trump said, I'm just going to get rid of that. And a judge said, you can't do that. It's unlawful. And he issued an extensive opinion explaining his reasoning. You know who appointed Judge Rodriguez?
DJT.
This was a Donald Trump appointee. So he can't claim this is some deranged, crazy leftist put into place by Biden or Obama who is out to get it. He has suffered a number of defeats at the hands of judges he's appointed himself. And that happened, too, in 2020 when he tried to engage in 60 lawsuits to challenge the election. Lost them all except for one inconsequential one. And did not do well in front of judges he appointed, including the 3 judges who he appointed to the Supreme Court who wanted nothing to with claims about electoral fraud in 2020.
Wait, did you see the article I sent you earlier today?
I don't know. What's it about?
It was pretty shocking to me.
Right.
This is a Washington Post article that says, the Trump team urged Ukraine to take U.S. deportees amid war, documents show.
Yeah, let's send them to a war zone to be killed. It's bad enough they're going to send them to this prison, where they're likely to suffer the cruelest, most inhumane treatments. Let's send them to a war zone where there's a chance that they'll be killed.
And at what point does this turn into quid pro quo for this? I know the mineral deal, you said that was a good thing, but at what point is it like, hey, take all... I think most of the immigrants they want to send from Ukraine were from like Eastern Europe or the Caucasus or Kazakhstan, those places. But still, at what point does it become a quid pro quo? Also, you're just going to send innocent civilians to a war zone? Like, what the heck?
And by the way, none of these people who's been deported have been subject to due process and had a chance to claim they're innocent. And I think I mentioned this before. The University of Syracuse tracks detentions and deportations. And they have said most of them either had no criminal record at all, they had done nothing wrong, or had, been subject to minor traffic violations. They weren't murderers and rapists and terrorists. I wrote a whole op-ed on this because I was the expert witness in a case challenging a law in Florida to make it easier to cooperate with ICE on detaining and deporting supposed undocumented immigrants. And one, just as we're seeing with Trump, I found a number of U.S. citizens had been rounded up. But two, the overwhelming majority of those rounded up, like here, either had no criminal record or minor traffic violations or similar. And I think maybe one or two of them, out of hundreds, were guilty of murder or rape or some very serious crime.
Yeah, that was just an article that I saw just break today, and I was like, well, that's pretty intense.
That is incredible.
Undocumented people to war zones.
War zones, yes. On say-so, not on any due process, of course.
Right. Crazy.
You were going to briefly talk about the movie tariff.
Let's skip that. Unless you really want to talk about it.
Give it 1 minute.
It's really confusing, and it's completely unfleshed out, so it's hard to give.
Trump didn't give
I mean,
details.
All we have is a Truth Social post about him rambling about Hollywood and tariffs on foreign movies, so nobody even understands exactly what that'll mean. Will it be a tariff on just foreign films, so like a French film that wants to play in theaters here? Will it be a tariff on production that happens in other countries, and how exactly would that work?
You can't tax production in other countries.
Well, once it came back to the U.S. for theatrical or streaming release, they would tariff it somehow.
So in other words, it's a mess, and we don't know how it's going to work.
No, and I don't know. I heard somebody say, it's a very different situation because we're not talking about a tangible product.
Right, we're not talking about cell phones. Right?
You're right. We're not talking about computer chips or cell phones or steel or whatever it might be.
Cars,
Right. So it's not a tangible product. So it's hard to talk about in the same vein as his other tariffs.
Right.
But I heard I forgot who said it, somebody on a local LA news station talking about it. And I pretty much agree with them. The way to fix the movie industry is with the carrot, not the stick. It's gone through enough challenges and change over the last 10, 20 years. If you keep beating it with a stick, it's probably just going to die. I think the best thing for the movie industry, especially in California, is going to be the continuation of a bill that Gavin Newsom put through to bring tax breaks to production in California. Because another big issue with Hollywood is it's becoming decentralized, so now a lot of people shoot in Louisiana or Georgia, and that's sort of Canada. Well, that's international technically. Right. So it's sort of destabilizing the local economy in California.
Yep.
My perspective is, if you want Hollywood back in Hollywood, you're going to have to provide the financial incentive to do so, and give him the carrot, not the stick. Bring tax incentives. Make it cheaper to shoot in California. That'll help the movie industry, not some sort of punitive tariff.
Speaking of tariffs, there's one more topic I have to address because it also happened today, and that is the meeting between Prime Minister Carney and Donald Trump, where Donald Trump just threw in his face, we still want you to become the 51st state. The One Donald Trump initiative, I'm wholly in favor for. Let's get those progressive senators and members of Congress and electoral votes from Canada. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, but you get my point. But beyond that, he lied blatantly to Carney. He said, we don't need you. You're irrelevant to our exports. You're only 4% of our exports. You know how accurate that is, Sam?
Not very.
It's off by 400%. They're actually 17% of our exports, and they are our number one customer. More exports to Canada than any other country. Mexico is second. It's a close second. And China is way, way behind. Not 4%, but 17%. $350 billion. Even if you're as rich as Donald Trump, that's not nothing, is it?
No.
He also blatantly lied to Carney by saying, you're ripping us off by $200 billion a year, referring to a supposed trade deficit between Canada and the U.S. Was that accurate, Sam?
No.
It was even more off base. It was about 600% off base. It's not a $200 billion deficit. It's a $36 billion deficit. And that doesn't count our surplus in services. That's just the goods deficit. When you put in the surplus in services, it vanishes to almost nothing. Certainly, no matter how you count it, it's not remotely close to $200 billion like Donald Trump claimed to Carney. Moreover, a trade deficit is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means we want to buy foreign goods, either because they're higher quality or cheaper. Doesn't necessarily mean anyone is ripping us off, does it?
Not necessarily.
All right. I think let's go to our brilliant audience.
Channel 1 Texas says...
But hold
on.
You have housekeeping.
Hold on. Channel 1 Texas says, Hollywood isn't a place, it's an idea.
Agreed.
Well, it's both. It's both a place and an idea.
But it's not so much Hollywood anymore. It's Burbank, isn't it?
Well, it's not even either anymore. It's Albuquerque and Louisiana and Savannah and Atlanta. I mean, look, here's the thing about Hollywood. In my opinion, it is, at this point, irreversibly damaged. We are never going to get to the point of some sort of... We are long past the golden era of Hollywood.
Right, and it has to do with technological and market forces.
Look, eyeballs have just shifted.
Yeah.
People watch YouTube. People watch TikTok. People's eyeballs are on Instagram. They're on...
Streaming.
Yeah, but streaming and Hollywood are sort of the same
similar
thing.
But what about AI?
Well, that's a whole... I'm just saying that people's eyeballs have literally shifted from their television screens, watching traditional television, watching traditional movies in movie theaters, to new media, which is YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I mean, I go to the gym and I see high schoolers running on the treadmill, and they're just scrolling through TikTok.
Wow.
You know, it's just... Hollywood is never going to get the eyeballs back that it used to have, simply for the fact of new media. And no matter how many tariffs Trump puts on, he's not going to bring back some golden age of Hollywood. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it's gone. Now, will Hollywood be able to create its own little market in this new media landscape? Probably, but it will never be what it used to be. Never.
None of us are going to be what we used to be.
Right. Nothing's right. Nothing's going to...
Right.
But I'm saying also just the amount of money and influence and reach that Hollywood has is only diminishing and will never go back to where it was.
I remember even in 1981 when I was on the quiz show Tic-Tac-Doe for 4 weeks, it wasn't filmed in Hollywood. It was filmed in Burbank.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, so,
but
it's not just the physical place of Hollywood by any means.
Right. Yes. Most production in Los Angeles actually happens in Burbank, California, which is actually not even in the city of Los Angeles, technically. But that's
another matter.
But yeah, I mean, Hollywood is a literal place.
Yeah. But
it's also an idea.
I agree. That's a symbol of the industry. At any rate,
all right.
Housekeeping, and then we'll get to questions.
We have only 400 likes. What the heck? That's weird. But we have like almost 1,200 people watching. Guys, make sure you hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Turn on that notification bell so you know we're live. Although we're live Tuesday, Thursdays, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you want your question in line for this guy, we operate off a donation and membership system. So if you want your question in his ear, potentially, it goes into our document. You got to donate. You got to become a member. All right, let's get to our first one.
One quick thing I want to say. I'm doing my third lecture of 4 tomorrow. You can still sign up. And you can archive the first two. You don't have to watch them live. Once you sign up with our special discount, which, as I said, each lecture is worth less than, an average dinner, you can archive them, watch them anytime, as many times as you want.
Our first question is a $70 donation from Vincent Thomas. They say, Professor, can you briefly explain how we have deteriorated as a country to have a man like Trump representing the United States, where 20 years ago his candidacy would have been laughable?
I'm not sure that's entirely true. America has always teetered between two poles. One, a polarity that supports democracy, tolerance, diversity. The other polarity is one that supports more authoritarianism, homogeneity, disdain for peoples other than themselves. Remember, we were one of the last major countries to abolish slavery. It took a civil war to get rid of slavery in this country. We had horribly restrictive immigration laws until the 1960s. We had Jim Crow discrimination in America until the 1960s. There's still lots of lingering discrimination against majorities, non-heterosexual, non-binary people, women. And Donald Trump represents, very sadly, that side of America that has always been with us. Now, that doesn't fully explain why we have him at this particular point in time. I think you talked about the new technology. It's perfectly suited for a candidate like Donald Trump, what I call the pseudo-populist. We had a whole show on that. He's not a populist. He's an anti-populist. That, I think, is extremely important. We've also seen the failure of the Democrats. How many times have I decried the Democrats for their failure to develop a compelling, coherent message? FDR did it, Harry Truman did it, Lyndon Johnson did it, JFK, and really, to extent Clinton, but Democrats have not been able to counter the simple, compelling, cultural war, pseudo-Christian, pro-business message of Republicans.
50 Australian dollars from Harry Chittenden. They say, a friend of mine whose PhD is in geopolitics says India is the country to watch when it comes to affairs regarding NATO, the U.S., etc., versus Russia, China, etc. India has a powerful military and economy and strategic interests on both sides. Thoughts on this?
I think that's very much in line with what I've been saying, that what's going on in India and Pakistan is not necessarily limited just to that region, but significantly impacts worldwide security and the national security of the United States. You're absolutely right about the Indian economy and its military, its enormous population, and its technological expertise. India is a very strange country, at least from my observation. I was there some time ago, so take it for what it's worth. But what I found was, I think at that time it was like 1.1 billion. Now it's 1.4. But it had this amazing, educated, technologically sophisticated middle class of about 300 to 400 million people, which may sound like a lot, but then there's nearly 1 billion people, struggling, living in poverty or near poverty. India also has enormous ecological problems. Its roads are clogged, its water supply is compromised, its air is compromised. And when a nation is ecologically compromised, that makes it very, very dangerous.
Professor, do you think Alcatraz prison will really be resurrected, or is this more of Trump's diversions?
God, I certainly hope not. Trump believes in being cruel. You know why? Well, it's just part of his nature. He's always been that way. But he thinks the crueler he is, the more you're going to discourage migration to the United States. But I think he also has an inherent cruel streak to him. It would be incredible. That prison hasn't been used in many, many decades. It wasn't used that long, I think about 30 years, even when it was in operation. But it would be incredibly difficult, incredibly expensive, and serve no purpose to try to resurrect Alcatraz. Moreover, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has already deep problems. Deep problems of corruption, deep problems of overcrowding, deep problems of chaos in the prisons. I believe just since early March or mid-March, about 10 or 12 prisoners have died in federal custody. Trump, before you think about, pumping yourself up by saying, I'm going to, resurrect the Rock, clean up your own house.
Do you think America should have an independent body in charge of running elections the way Australia does?
Yeah.
They have an AEC in charge of all administrative elections, making sure everyone knows it is on, as well as preventing any misinformation about elections. They're also in charge of determining boundaries to work for them. You can't have been a member of any political party for 10 years.
I love it.
You love it?
I love it, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon in the U.S. because the politicians are not ready to relinquish control. But we have seen some progress in this regard, not at the federal level, but at the state level. A number of states have adopted independent commissions for trying to combat gerrymandering and drawing politically fair lines. It hasn't worked perfectly, but a combination of enforcing the civil rights laws and independent commissions for redistricting in the states, I think, is a very positive development.
Are you following what's going on in India, Pakistan right now? What can Trump do to avoid a war between the two?
Get rid of Hegseth and put someone competent in charge of our military and relieve Marco Rubio of 3 of his other portfolios and let him concentrate on being Secretary of State and try to put someone smart and experienced in the Defense Department, someone you can rely on. What we've seen in this administration in every regard, sadly, is, I'm only going to do merit. Well, we've had the least meritorious appointments in the history of the country. Not only that, what is he spending vital federal resources in every department on? His revenge and retribution, instead of using federal personnel and federal resources to protect our national security and promote the common good here at home.
$35 donation from Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi.
He's one of our, or she is one of our loyal supporters. Thank you.
You can just say they.
Well, it's not a they. It could be. Could be several people.
No, but could be singular as well. They said.
Maybe.
You're not into that? Okay. They say. See, they say.
You said that.
I know, but I'm saying that works. Vacuum tubes for Hi-Fi.
She said I, or he said I.
Right. They say I received a jury summons for later in the month. I have a legitimate excuse, but I am choosing not to exercise it in the interest of the rule of law. What do you think about this attitude? This is a question for both of you.
You want to go first?
No.
I think it's incredibly commendatory of you. Too many people avoid. And it's understandable why you might want to avoid commitment of your time, effort, and energy right now in doing the right thing. And I think you may find, if you're picked, just because you're called doesn't mean you're actually going to serve on a jury. I was called once and never did get to serve. But it could be very interesting, depending on the case, serving on a jury. And it is a chance to uphold the rule of law. The time when ordinary people in America are most powerful is when they sit on the jury. Remember, it's 12 ordinary people who convicted Donald Trump of 34 felonies, a number of ordinary people in civil cases who found that he had abused, defamed, and hurt E. Jean Carroll, or that he had committed massive financial fraud.
I think it's a individual's decision at the end of the day. If you have a legitimate excuse and that is keeping you from serving on a jury, I think that's perfectly fine.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just saying I support her decision or his decision.
You can just say their decision.
Their decision. I don't like that, but that's
really?
Right. Nah.
Why?
It just seems plural to me, but that's okay.
It is, but it's both. It's plural.
I know. I understand.
Were you also shocked to hear that Governor Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is not running for Senate. I bet John Ossoff is breathing a huge sigh of relief.
Yes, the great sucking sound you hear from Georgia is indeed that huge sigh of relief from Democratic Senator John Ossoff, who almost certainly would have lost to Kemp in, a swing but more red-leaning state and state politics than blue-leaning. I think now the chances of Ossoff retaining is vastly greater with Kemp out of the picture. I don't know why he chose not to run. Maybe he has much more lucrative opportunities. Maybe he was worried he could lose. I think he'd certainly be the prohibitive favorite, but that doesn't guarantee his victory. And maybe he doesn't, after being a governor, the top dog, he doesn't want to be one of 100 senators and a backbencher.
On a midnight train to Georgia. How's that?
Pretty damn good.
Thanks. This is from our Discord mod, Christopher. They say, hey, Professor, what do you think is the biggest disconnect between American voters and voters outside the U.S. who spurn MAGA-like candidates? In other words, why do you think we keep falling for these con artists while, as we see, everyone else spurns them?
Well, sadly, it's not everyone else. I just talked about Romania, where you had a hard-right candidate. You have Viktor Orban, of course, in Hungary. You have Vladimir Putin in Russia. Now, Vladimir Putin is not a democratic leader, but when he first came in, he did have popular support. I think I explained the very, polarized history that the United States has experienced. We have had, virulently racist, slave-holding presidents like Andrew Johnson before. And Andrew Johnson, who sadly took over when Lincoln was shot, did everything in his power to try to resurrect slavery and everything but name only.
Professor, I came across an article in the New York Times about higher education and the cost. It's also worth noting that Boston University disbanded its football team because more students were likely to go to the opera than the football game. What are your thoughts on this?
Certainly, I'm supporting the opera in Boston over the BU football team. And, of course, I go to a school, or I teach at a school where Sam went. What's our record in football?
Undefeated.
No football team at American University, no football team at my undergraduate institution, Brandeis University. I have been talking about this since I headed a task force on accreditation way back in the 1990s.
You've been talking about college football?
No.
Oh.
Well, I probably have, but I'm talking about costs.
Oh, gotcha.
And the big problem with universities is this explosion of bureaucracy. I have nothing against these people. A lot of them are my close friends. I'm not saying they're incompetent, but it's an unnecessary explosion. It's a wonderful saying from President James Garfield, actually a very smart guy. Didn't have much chance to be president before he was assassinated, but he said, my idea of a great university is a log bench with me on one end and Mark Hopkins, the great teacher of his time, on the other end. The purpose of a university should be to facilitate teaching and research. And it's just become too bloated bureaucratically. And this is universally true across American higher education.
BU is a hockey school anyways, right?
Have they been in the Frozen Four?
Oh, yeah. I think they've won many times.
Oh, cool.
I mean, the thing about football that's interesting is that, a smaller program like BU, their football program probably loses them money. But if you're a bigger school...
If you're in Alabama.
No, I mean, not even just Alabama. Most, Division I, Power 5 conference schools...
Make a lot of money.
Make a crap ton of money from their football programs. So,
and now the players can make money, right?
Yes. So you're not going to see these bigger institutions disbanding their football teams, I don't think.
I would imagine the University of Alabama makes more money from football than it does from opera.
I bet that's true. Kraganor says, if you were judging the keys purely from the POV of low-income independents, would you still have called the policy change and economic keys for Harris?
Am I getting a hypothetical here?
It's not even a hypothetical. I think the answer is, yeah, of course you'd call them the same.
Yeah.
It's not about your POV. It's about...
And you can't, partition the keys for a piece of the electorate. The whole point of the keys is they cover the electorate as a whole. Otherwise, they're pretty, useless.
Right. The whole point of the keys is that anybody can call them and they should all be the same.
Right.
No
and
matter
not
what.
just focused on a part of the electorate. But I get the point. The point is, one can argue both parties have not been fully responsible to the needs of low-income people.
Yeah, sure.
And, and I've talked about that a lot. Talked a lot about the enormous maldistribution of income, about the $13 trillion wealth transfer since 1989 from 99% of us to 1%.
You know what I find interesting, especially on online discourse? There's this idea that liberal people are like these frail, pale, skinny, unathletic, unhealthy people. But it's interesting. I saw a map the other day that showed that... and this is not to knock anybody or any state or any county, but, there's this idea that all MAGA people are like these healthy, strong, athletic
robust
people.
Yes.
But if you actually look at the breakdown by county, the most obese counties in the United States were all MAGA counties.
And with the highest disease rates.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to get at is, MAGA ain't worried about poverty. I mean, if you look at these poor, obese counties, they're all voting for Republicans, and they're all have really poor health outcomes.
There's a whole book about that, which I have a lot of disagreements with, but it's kind of interesting. It's called What's the Matter with Kansas? And it basically asks the question, why are people in Kansas, a lot of whom, as you say, are poor, have health issues, need government assistance, why are they voting for Republicans?
I also don't understand this rhetoric around that Republicans have been so successful in, saying that, blue states are these crime-ridden, violent places. Again, I don't know. I keep running across all these statistical maps. The highest crime rates statistically per capita are almost all in red states.
I wrote a whole book about that.
Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri,
Florida.
Yeah, Florida. These are the places that actually have the high. I don't quite understand how these false narratives have not only caught on, but it seems like people actually believe them.
Oh, they do. New York is supposed to be this, criminal murder capital of the world. It's actually one of the safest cities in the world.
Especially per capita.
Yeah, of course. It's all per capita. I wrote a lot about this in two of my books, one of them being Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America, showing the red states, which have very loose gun laws, have gun death rates vastly higher than the blue states, which have strict gun laws.
Yeah.
How much time do we have left?
Oh, that's a good question. 2 minutes.
I'll take 3 more questions.
Wow, there's another big comeback tonight. The Pacers came back and beat the Cavs. 20-point comeback.
So they're like 2-0 on the 2-0. Cavs?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
All right, this is from a $5 donation from Philip H. They say, trivia for Allan. If he gets it right, 5 donated memberships.
Wow.
Are you going to take it?
I can take it.
Their question is, who was the first American-born president?
John Adams.
Is that true?
I'm not an expert in the early republic, but I think that's right.
Hey, Siri, who was the first American-born president?
It was either Adams or Jefferson.
You messed it up. Hold on, quiet. Hey, Siri. I didn't mean quiet, but just silencio, por favor. Hey, Siri, who was the first American-born president?
Okay, I found this on the web for who was the first American-born president. Check it out.
Martin Van Buren?
What?
I don't know. Siri sucks. Let me
that's off.
Hold on, let me ask ChatGPT.
That might be right, actually.
Really?
Yeah. When you say well, this is I'm not sure what the question means. I thought it meant you weren't born in England.
Yeah, that's what I think it means.
That would be George Washington then. The United States born is a whole different thing because the United States is not till 1789.
Oh, it is Martin Van Buren.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
U.S. born, not American born.
Oh, they gifted 5 memberships.
All right.
Thank you, Philip. Appreciate that. Well. All right, how many more questions you want? I forgot.
2 more.
2 more. Avenue 72nd says, what is the likelihood that a recession will happen this year due to Trump's tariffs?
You're asking me to predict the economy? I'm not an expert on that, and the experts are always wrong. As my great late friend Jack German used to say, there's an economist on every street corner in D.C., and not one of them agrees with another. But generally, the forecasts are saying about 50-50, maybe 60-40.
The stock market is acting so strange. I mean, it was crashing, and now it's surging again.
And then it crashed again today.
Oh, did it? I didn't even see.
Went down 300 points or something. It's crazy.
It.
I remember when people thought it was a catastrophe if the market went down 100 points. Now that's considered nothing.
Is it just me, or is the stock market just a way for grown men to play games?
Pretty much.
Okay. Our final question of the night is from member Statbrat Stacy. And the good news is, if you're like, oh, Lichtman Live is over, guess what the good news is?
Post-show
on my channel is coming up right after this. They say, as a Roman Catholic, I was deeply offended that Trump posted a blasphemous photo of himself as Pope. Jesus himself entrusted Simon Peter to build his church. We can trace the lines of popes from Francis back to St. Peter. To have Trump liken himself to the Pope is offensive. How can this not offend evangelical Christians?
It certainly should. You know, Jesus said, Peter, I believe they changed his name from Simon to Peter, you will be the rock upon which I build my church. That is what led to the whole line of popes. And I believe popes they take a lot of names, but they don't call themselves Pope Peter in deference to the original Saint Peter. There can be no question, as I said, that what Trump did is offensive. The problem with evangelical Christians is they've long ago given Donald Trump a complete pass. Doesn't matter what he did. You don't remember, but I remember how offended, mortally offended, evangelical Christians were because President Clinton had a consensual, if inappropriate, affair with intern Monica Lewinsky. But Donald Trump's affairs, his civil conviction for sexual abuse, his bragging about grabbing women by their private parts, about chasing married women, none of that matters because they come up with, these self-serving excuses. Oh, he's like King David. He's a flawed person, but he's still the great messenger of God. They were saying about Clinton, immoral behavior. We don't care about your policies. They are disqualifying. Now it's only policies that they agree with that matter, making them just another sleazy interest group, no different than the NRA or any Chamber of Commerce, abortion rights movements, or any other political interest movements. They have no moral authority. Plus, the biggest of the evangelical denominations, the Southern Baptist Conference, is rife with sexual abuse of women. There was a whole report by Guidepost written about this, which, of course, they tried to bury.
Okay, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for the evening. Donations that didn't get read: Limited Light, Bilal Nadim, Vladimir Planton, Channel 1 Texas Comic Fan. Thank you all for donating. Lichtman Live post shows coming up right after this. But before that, Dad, what are your final words to the people?
It's very heartening to see a judge appointed by Donald Trump doing the right thing for the Constitution and the law, just that it is totally unsettling to hear Donald Trump says he doesn't know if it's his duty to uphold the Constitution or it's his duty to give people due process.
All right, with that, we are wrapping Lichtman Live up on this date, May 6th, 2025. Say goodnight,
It's my
Dad.
daughter's birthday, Kara. Happy birthday, Kara. If you are listening, we love you dearly.
Happy birthday, Kara. All right, good night.
Good night.